Okay, so in this video, we are going to start section 9.1, and this is the section that typically gives students a lot of problems because one, their algebra skills are not super strong, and number two, you have to pretty much memorize all these trig identities. So I'm going to prove or derive some of these identities with you, and I'll just go over some of the ones that you already know. And I think it's very helpful that you know how to derive them, because then if you forget them, you can kind of figure out, how they came about. So first of all, what is a trig identity? A trig identity is a trig equation that is true for all variables for both sides of the equation. And you already know some of the trig identities based on chapter 8, right? And so these are the 6 reciprocal identities, right? So sine theta, you already know, is 1 over cosecant theta. And likewise, right, if you cross multiply these two guys, cosecant is the same thing as 1 over sine, right? These two guys can interchange, these two guys can interchange. Cosine, of course, is 1 over secant. Remember, these letters do not match, right? S and SC don't match. And then secant is 1 over cosine. Tangent is 1 over cotan. And of course, cotangent is just 1 over tan. Okay, so these are some of the identities you already know. And for tangent, right, you know, tangent is not only just 1 over cotan, it's also sine over cosine. This is called the quotient identity. And then cotangent, right, is cosine over sine. Okay, so both this and this is true, right? This and this is also true. All right, so we are going to cover some new ones. These are called the Pythagorean identities. And I'm actually going to derive them here with you. So if you take a look at the unit circle, never mind that it's not drawn perfectly to scale. If I ask you, what is the equation of this circle? Well, I guess you guys did not cover conics yet in Math 3 this year, and I didn't cover it this year. The equation of a circle that's centered at 0, 0 is just x squared plus y squared is equal to 1, okay? And this guy right here is actually the radius. Okay, so if this is the equation of the circle centered at 0, 0, right? If I were to form an angle over here, we'll call that theta. And if I ask you, what are the coordinates of this x and y, right? You already know, based on your unit circle knowledge, that any x coordinate on the unit circle is just cosine theta, right? Because x over r, right? In this case, your x is just this. Your r, your r in this case is just 1. All right, so if I take the cosine, which is x over r, x over 1 is just x. And x is cosine theta. The y value, of course, is sine theta, right? Any coordinate on the x, any coordinate on the unit circle is cosine theta. Any y value, of course, is sine theta. Okay, well, if x is equal to cosine theta and y is equal to sine theta, I'm going to substitute. Cosine theta, quantity squared, plus sine theta, quantity squared, will just give you this. Okay, so the first Pythagorean identity is called cosine squared plus sine squared is equal to 1. Okay, so how do I get the remaining 2? What I would do over here is divide everything by cosine squared. And over here, if I divide everything by cosine squared, I'm going to get 1. Sine squared over cosine squared. Well, we know that sine over cosine is just tangent, right? So sine squared over cosine squared is tangent squared theta. And 1 over cosine squared, of course, is just secant squared theta. So there is Pythagorean identity number 2, I'm going to transfer that over here. 1 plus tangent squared theta is equal to secant squared theta. Okay, one last one, right? We still have number 3, Pythagorean identity number 3. Okay, so going back to this original equation, right? Cosine squared plus sine squared is equal to 1. Instead of dividing everything by cosine squared, I'm going to divide everything by sine squared. Okay, so even in deriving these identities, you have to know other identities, right? You have to know that cosine squared over sine squared, well, that's just cotangent. Sine squared over sine squared is just 1, so this should be plus 1. And 1 over sine squared, that's just cosecant squared. Okay, so this will be your last Pythagorean identity, right? And all 3 of these, right, just come from the equation of the circle. You know that the x-coordinate on the unit circle is cosine theta. You know the y value of the coordinate on the unit circle is just sine theta.